In this video, I'm going to show you how to make these very easy covered ammo boxes and pallets. Very simple, very effective on the table. I'll show you how I did it. So to start with, you're going to want some wet wipes or some flushable toilet wipes. Take them out straight away and put them to one side to dry. For the base of these pallets or covered boxes, I'm going to do this in two different styles. One of them is going to be like a concrete and the other one is going to be like a fake pallet. So I take some foam board and I cut out some 5cm by 5cm squares. I also do the same with some EPVC, which is one of my favorite materials. And then I'm going to make a fake pallet. Now, if you want to see somebody do a real pallet, then there's two videos I can recommend. They'll be linked in the description below. One is RFD Hobby and Sean's video, and the other is Gert from Dark Matter Workshop. They both do like proper pallets, but I'm trying to cheese it and fake it a little bit and make it a little bit easier for us. So what I'm going to do is cut out a bit of mount board, which is basically like it seems to be not as good version of chipboard, and I'm going to cut out a 6cm by 6cm base, and then I'm going to get some barbecue sticks and I'm going to cut these to 5cm in length, so not quite as big as the pallet, and I'm going to cut 3 of these, and then I'm simply going to glue them to the bottom roughly in place so that it's like 1cm from the side, and you know, just eyeballing it so that there's 3 in the middle, and that creates like a really good fake pallet. It's not like a wood pallet, but we're going to paint it like metal, and you know, it's actually going to work very well. Now, instead of just doing ammo boxes here, I'm going to be doing some bigger pieces, and for those I'm going to be using the same materials, either foam board or EPVC, but I'm basically going to cut them to size later on, but I'll get onto that in a second. For the actual contents of the pallets, you can really use anything, but I'm going to show you some variants that I did. One of these, I literally just took some bottle caps, glued 2 of them together, and that sort of made like a pseudo like barrel kind of shape. I glued up some of them together. I think I did 4, so there was 3 on the bottom and then 1 on top. That looked fine. For one of them, just to show you that you could do it with just foam board, I literally just cut out strips of foam board at various different like heights. I glue 3 of the same pieces size together, and then I just make like 2 different other shapes to go on the pallet. Make sure that these are all going to fit on your pallet or your base, whatever you're going to use, and just hot glue everything together. Another one, I literally just cut a cube of XPS foam and glue that onto one of the bases. But I do want to make some more like serious looking ammo pallets, and the way that I do this is, I could have done this with a knife, but I use my hot wire cutter just to cut out these like shapes of boxes. I think my measurements here are 2 centimeters wide, 1.5 centimeter tall, and I think 4 centimeters in length. I do that with the hot wire cutter just for precision. You could use a knife. And then on top of those, what I'm going to do is glue some cardboard, the same mount board that I used before, which is about 1 mil thick. And I'm just going to make it so that it's slightly bigger than my XPS foam and glue that on top. And it's going to give a sort of look of like an ammo box. I make a few different variants of using XPS foam. I also take the copper couplers that we used in making the barrel video, and I'm going to pretend that they're actually barrels without doing any of the work to them. I'm not even going to put like a top on it. I'm going to let the sheet hide and mask everything. So I just glue some barrels to the base, XPS to the base, just literally all sorts. What you're really looking for here is sort of like the shape and the implication, if you will, the implication of something interesting being underneath them. So for the ammo pallet ones, for example, I did a set of like 4, 2 on top of each other, and then I did another set which is like 2 and then 1 diagonal. I think like Gert and Dark Matter Workshop did something very similar, because it's just creating the illusion of something interesting. But then I want to talk about some bigger pieces. Yes, you can do boxes and stuff like that, and that's all going to look great. However, you can literally in this case just take anything. Now, normally I'll only show you stuff that you can specifically buy. I do try and do a version with some Yakult bottles, which I didn't really like. I think I should have probably put them sideways. But literally here you can just take anything, make a base that's out of your favorite material. I'm using one here, it's EPVC. The other one I'm using foam board. For my favourite one of these is where I take a vitamin bottle, a bit from a plumbing kit or like a plumbing set where it's like this interesting cap, put the 2 together, and then next to it I just put like a little coupling pipe, and then I think, well, that could actually make like an industrial piece of terrain on its own, but once I cover it, it's going to look fine. Now, when it comes to covering these with your dried out cloths, there's sort of 2 main methods here. One of them is to put the cloth over it and then cut it to size either with scissors or a knife so that you only have the right cloth for the right aesthetic. I'm not going to be doing that. It was way easier for me just to take a large piece, do all the gluing and then trim it down. But you do have to be careful, and we'll get onto that in a second. When you are gluing your dried out cloth on top of your pallets or whatever you're making, the best way I found was to simply start with putting hot glue on the top of the piece and then just sort of laying the cloth on it and then lifting up each side and then putting hot glue. Like, you want to put it really in the crevices. Now, when you try and put the cloth into that hot glue, if you use your fingers, you might burn your finger. I did it once or twice. It would be way easier and more sensible to use either scissors, a ruler. Just use something that's not your hand. And yeah, you put the hot glue in the crevices and just glue it in place. And you'll find that actually there'll be a lot of like natural folds in the cloth. But what you want to do is in the crevices of a fold, put a little bit of hot glue, take your pen or whatever you're using and just push the fold into that crevice. How much you want your cloth to overlap the sides is up to you. If you're going with the more pseudo proper looking pallets that I made, then it doesn't really matter as much or as little you do. If you're doing a small one and you want it to look like a covered pallet, then it's best to cover the sides so you don't really have anything to hide. But for me, I liked a little bit showing here and there, so when I came to cutting it with the scissors after I'd glued all the folds and stuff in place, I literally just trimmed it down the sides. Now the only problem is, and it's a little bit hard to explain, that you want to keep in line of the cloth so you don't end up with various different cuts of the corners, because obviously if you were using one big blanket to cover whatever you were covering, it's obviously probably going to be a square or a rectangle. It's not going to have different like jagged shapes. It's not a massive problem. Once I glued it to the side of the base, I found you really couldn't tell where the corners were anyway. You can just hide them with fold. And that's it. I literally just do that for all of them. There is nothing else to this. You just hot glue the cloth on the top, then lift up the sides and put the hot glue in the crevices, push it into the crevices, then hot glue the folds in place, and honestly, you're pretty much done. Even on the bigger one, I literally just do the same thing. I did have to buy bigger wet wipes from Amazon for the bigger pieces. You probably could have done it in 2 cloths, but I just bought a bigger piece that was like 25 centimeters by 25 centimeters. But the process was exactly the same. The size is almost irrelevant if your cloth is big enough. Now, before I paint these, one thing I would recommend doing is making some sandbags if you want to add that as an extra detail and gluing them now, rather than what I did, which was paint it all and then glue them. That was just a mistake. But to make the sandbags relatively simple, I literally just got some DAS modelling clay, rolled it up into a tube, squished it down, cut it into like sandbag shapes, textured it a little bit with my knife. The end of my knife has like a little texture in it. Painted that with a tan colour and then a Serif Sepia wash. Simple. And then because it's dried cloth, what we're going to do is take some watered down PVA and just spray that over the whole cloth. What we're trying to get here is so that the cloth itself now becomes, instead of just dry, we want it to become hard. You can do that as many times as you like. I literally just did it once and then I sprayed it black. Now I probably shouldn't have sprayed it black, I probably should have just painted it the colour, but it is what it is. And then I'm going to do 2 colours. I wanted one that's sort of like the tan colour and I wanted one that's green. Now the colour that I started off with for the tan was this sort of yellow, and it was the wrong colour. It was way too dark and just the wrong colour. So then I went over that with like a buff titanium, did a brown wash, dry brushed it back up with the buff titanium. Fantastic. And for the green, it's literally just a dark green with a green and a little bit of buff titanium mixed in as the dry brush. Didn't do a wash on that and it was completely fine. You may have a little bit of issue getting into some of the crevices when you paint this. It's not the end of the world. Just take a bit of your watered down paint and just prod it in basically. For the bases, if you're going to be doing concrete, it's relatively simple. You just paint it grey and then stipple on a bit of grey and a little bit of lighter grey. I literally just use grey and buff titanium mixed together, stipple it in with my brush. You could use a spoon, you could use a sponge if you want a better result, depending on how much is showing. I tried to paint some as wood, the ones where it was like just one side showing, so I painted it in like a buff titanium and then give it a brown wash. Didn't really work. Very difficult to get wood when it doesn't have a texture, so up to you. Better than that is the actual fake pseudo pallets that I used. I just painted them as like a metal top and you can't really see the base underneath, so it's literally just a bit of silver. Didn't even give it a wash or a dry brush because there's not that much of it showing. I think that they look pretty damn good and I would recommend that one. So I glued the sandbags just into place so it looks like the sandbags are weighing down some of the covers, because I'm not doing any straps or anything like that. We're keeping this very simple. Honestly, really simple, really effective. I really like the fake pallets because when you see them on the table, you can't see underneath them. The fake pallet where it's literally just a bit of card and the barbecue stick, I think for the amount of effort you put in, that's the best result. Doing concrete on the bigger pieces, that makes sense, but I wouldn't really recommend doing concrete on the smaller bits like I have done, but it is what it is. Overall, I'm very happy with the effect. I made quite a few of these, very easy to do, very effective on the table, pretty happy with the result. Thank you to my Patreons, I do really appreciate you guys, thank you very much. Have a most beautiful day, like and subscribe, goodbye.